Hey everyone, I'm here to talk about briefly tie a lot of different things from what you typically see in a management textbook together to provide a lot more practical sense of how you can use this stuff in your career trajectories once, let's say, you graduate from college. So, just to not belabor the point, here's what you need to remember. Right there. Don't peter out. Okay, we'll get to it in a second, but you might be asking yourself, what's this peter out? What do you mean? Uh, well, we're talking about not necessarily the name Peter. Well, it is the name Peter, but it's the last name Peter for Lawrence Peter, a management professor from the 60s who wrote a book, and it was a satire, but we'll get to that in a second. But the main point here is remember, don't peter out. We'll get into it in a minute. Well, first, let's look at why this should be so practical. We know that career trends have been changing for the last couple of decades. That people no longer uh, approach their career like perhaps our grandparents did. So, my grandfather uh, and people of his generation would have gone to work for the same company and likely retired from that company. Maybe they would have gotten a Rolex watch or some type of nice retirement gift for spending 30 plus years at a company. Now, we see because of globalization, that has largely shifted. And I don't mean just for companies, right? So companies are obviously competing against a lot more global competitors, but that drives the competition for talent as well. Because now companies can hire talented people from places like India, China. Uh, Obviously, a lot of countries that were already being pulled for talent in the U.S. are already still competing. So UK, Germany, so on and so forth. All the Eastern countries, we see that there's a lot of mobility between workers, or that a lot of companies are outsourcing work to citizens from all over the world. So what does that mean? It means that people are more mobile. That that we're not like our grandparents were, right? So a lot of people are moving from job to job, and what is we need to figure out how we can best approach this, and what we can achieve that helps us become that type of manager that we want to be and get the career that we want, even though it's going to be a lot more lateral or consequential jumps from company to company that perhaps older generations did not have. And so when we're climbing the career ladder, there are a number of different things that we should consider. And this is where it all comes back together. I told you, don't peter out. Well, let's get to it. Let's talk about Lawrence Peter and his satire that he wrote in a book called, surprisingly, oh, not surprisingly, The Peter Principle. But before we get started, I have to kind of preface what Lawrence Peter's going through, what's in his mindset. To Peter, here, he thinks that undeniably that competency is sexy, and that incompetency is just a big turnoff. And so, I mean, he's right, right? I mean, like we want people who are competent at their job, and we really don't like people who can't do their job very well. But this is the background for which he and uh, Hull, Peter and Hull write this satire of a book that they titled The Peter Principle. And so I'm going to give you a quick insight into the rules behind the Peter Principle and why it matters for management. Again, this is satire, but the first half of the Peter Principle really rings true, and the second half, arguably, you could put yourself into that and say, well, yeah, there's a lot of truth in that as well. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. The Peter Principle makes the argument that promotion decisions are often based on past performance in another role, not for the role in which the person will now occupy. And because that's the case, what happens is they're selected for a promotion based on past performance, not required skill sets or knowledge or abilities for the new role. And what that ends up happening, or what ends up happening there, is that given enough time and enough promotions, the people who are not prepared for those new roles will be promoted to the level of incompetence. So this is the turnoff that Peter really found, and his research was really on incompetency. And he made the argument in the Peter Principle and in his research that promotion decisions are based on past performance, and because of that, some people will not be prepared for the new roles in which they occupy. And so that's when you can start to get a lot of people who have reached their level of incompetency, and therefore they cannot accomplish the goals of the job as effectively as they did before. And so that's where they end up staying for the rest of their career in the organization. So they were maybe getting promotions before, but now once they get to this point of their incompetency, they can no longer get that promotion. And so everybody who was under them is kind of stuck with this incompetent manager, or working around things and making sure that work can get done. And that brings us to the second point, or the second tenet of the Peter Principle, which argued that thus, because people are given increasingly authority until they can't work competently, what happens is that in time, every post tends to be occupied by an employee who is not competent to carry out his or her duties. And if you find yourself in a large bureaucracy, perhaps a government or a government organization, you'll hear a lot of people say things like this because they have so many people who are working for the organization, and they have so many people who have risen to a level where they no longer get promotions. And so you have a lot of people, once you put yourself in those shoes and look around and deal with the stressors, deal with the day-to-day stuff, you can really see why a lot of people who are bright and brilliant can look around and say, wow, look at all these incompetent people occupying these roles that I have to report to. And so the second tenet of the Peter Principle also argues that work is accomplished only by those who have not yet reached their level of incompetency in an organization. Now, this second part is perhaps a lot more arguable or open to interpretation. But the first part, the idea that people are promoted to a point where they can't handle the job, it really strikes a chord with a lot of people. And that, in essence, is what really rings true with the Peter Principle and what we want to focus on when we talk about the different skill sets and things that we need to rise through our career in this discussion that we're having. So let's zoom back out and start to apply the Peter Principle to see how we can connect all the different types of skills that we might need once we get on the job. Well, first of all, we know that, well, let's say you're going to a business school. You graduate from business school with an accounting degree. That's a very specialized degree. A lot of the employers who are hiring accounting degrees are accounting graduates. They're looking for specialized technical skills. So they're looking at people who know generally accepted accounting principles, They're looking for people who perhaps might know how to debit and credit or balance a ledger, and they want to make sure that they get that type of technical skill. So often, when you get hired out of college, you will be asked to do very technical expertise. Um, so let's say that you graduate in IT, and let's even take it to the extreme and say that that you fit all the stereotypes, not as social as other people, that you really enjoy being inside, just in front of your computer, just typing away. So let's say we have someone like that. They graduate with their degree in IT. They go to a job. They get hired for their technical expertise, and they excel at that. Uh, so they become really good at writing really efficient code. And let's say that they're doing it on their own terms. Maybe they're working in their basement, writing code late at night until 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. Uh, and they've got all their snacks around them, maybe drinking a Coke from time to time. It's not like, it's not like it's 3 a.m. in the morning right now and I have snacks around me. I digress. Anyways, so let's say that you have someone who writes really efficient code. They do it on their own terms. They're really great at it, and they get promoted because, lo and behold, they did great technical work, and so they get promoted based on their past experience and not necessarily the experience that is needed for the job that comes ahead. And so let's say that you can continue to do this, that you continue to use your technical skills, and that you can pass along and get through a few promotions. But at some point, that person who has been really good at coding and was very efficient at managing his or herself, now, through a series of promotions, he or she will now be asked to manage people. And here, everything shifts. It's no longer, can I do the job that I've been asked to do? It's, can I motivate other people to do the job that I used to have? And that is inherently different, because what happens is, if you do not have the people skills, if you do not have the social acumen or the social skills to motivate others to do the job that they need to do, then you could potentially peter out. And this is where we see, this is where we see micromanagers start to emerge in organizations. So just take a second and think of someone like Michael Scott from The Office. First of all, he had great technical skills. He was the best salesman for Dunder Mifflin in the region. And all of a sudden he gets promoted to manager. And what happens? Oh, he's a little socially aloof. He's kind-hearted, pretty genuine, but he has horrible expertise. So here's a good example of someone who has petered out, that has reached their level of incompetence. And that's when you see a lot of people coming in to kind of work around the incompetent boss. And so maybe it's Jim Halpert or Pam, but that's getting too much into The Office. I digress. But anyways, this is where we see micromanagers really start to emerge, is when they get to the point where they have a span of control, people who report to them. And they were really good at doing the technical stuff before, but now they're asked to teach other people to be really good at technical stuff. And perhaps they don't have the right people skills to motivate people, or to really understand what situation those people are finding themselves in, because they can do the job themselves, but perhaps it's really hard for them to step into another subordinate's shoes and say, oh wow, maybe there's some family issues or something that's really hard happening outside of work that is affecting their performance. Or maybe they have some type of some type of disability or difference in the way that they view things that that person didn't even know or doesn't even know how to address. So all of a sudden, there are all these different layers of things that are added on top. And they're very social, and they're not necessarily how well I can do the job myself. And if I am not able to use my knowledge or social ability to motivate others to do or to teach them to do their job better, then that's where the micromanager shows up, right? Because it's much easier for me. I know what's going on. I know that you didn't, oh, you right there. I know you didn't cross your T's and dot your I's. So let me do that for you. Let me just stand over your shoulder and say, yeah, yep, you need go over here, go over here. And so really what happens is they're really good at doing the job themselves, and they just start to stand over someone's shoulder because they don't know how to teach someone to do the job. They'd much rather just correct someone, and that's where they peter out. But at some point, let's say that you can do really well and you have the people skills. You were prepared ahead of time. And at some point, you get to that promotion and you're really good at managing people. You're really good at getting the goals that are given to you and then making sure that everybody can accomplish those goals. Great. So you get promoted some more. But now, what they're asking you to do isn't necessarily to come in and be given a goal that you help other people achieve. They're asking you to write these goals, to make sure you understand what's going on, to drive the ship. And this is something that is inherently even more different than just managing people, right? This is where we go from being managers, everyday managers, to being leaders, to looking for some type of vision, some type of strategy. And so this is where people often fall to the wayside, where they peter out because they're really good at helping others. They were really good at the technical stuff, and they're really good at helping others achieve their goals, but maybe they're not so good at the conceptual stuff, at the stuff that needs to be done, that needs to be figured out, but isn't as clear cut as a goal that's just handed to them. And so this is where they need to be looking out, looking to the horizon, seeing what's going on, what needs to change, what are the trends that are happening, how do I take the external environment and map it to our external environment opportunities and threats, and map it to our internal resources to make best use of not only the human resources that we have, but to position ourselves in a way that we can come out better than our competitors. And this is why it's really important to make sure that we understand the road ahead, and that we want to make sure that we do not peter out, because there is a strong chance that we will be hired, or for a lot of people, that they will be hired to the level of incompetence. And at that point, a job that they were really good at before now becomes something that they're mediocre at, and then people have to work around them. So, what you want to avoid are competency traps. Put differently, a competency trap is a pathology of learning where an actor persists on current practices and does not learn alternatives that are superior in the long term, because they're focusing on what they were good at before, and they're continuing to use this almost like it's a heuristic or a bias. It worked for me before, but the environment is changing, and I don't pop my head out of the sand to realize that. And so what happens is, because I can get by with what was helping me before, at some point when I get to the point where I am hired to do a new job, those old tricks no longer apply. And this is where that old adage of you can't teach an old dog new tricks really comes into play. And so, bringing all this stuff back together, what can we take to tie this stuff to remember when we go out and we start our jobs and we make sure that we want to progress and become the managers at the level that we want to achieve? Well, Here's the takeaway. There are generally three broad categories of skills that we need to progress: the technical stuff, the people skills, and the strategic or conceptual skills. To get where you want to go in your career, you must not peter out. Know your strengths and weaknesses. Be prepared to maximize those strengths and minimize your weaknesses to build on opportunities that benefit or build on your strengths, and then periodically check and assess your performance, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to avoid competency traps. So, bringing it back together, what we said at the beginning of this mini lecture, right? I'm going to go through. Don't peter out. Okay, guys, until next time, I'll see you later.